The drive from the ferry docks at Picton to the Golden Caves bed and breakfast was about 4 hours. Thank goodness Laurel suggested changing the ferry time to get us to Picton by noon. The last hour was driving the incredible scary Takaka Hill. To quote our host's email, it is a steep, winding road with 257 corners and some almost 320-degree hairpin turns. There were often 100-kilometer-per-hour signs right before a huge bend with cliff drop-offs, and it seemed to be okay to pass on curves in New Zealand. The Golden Caves bed and breakfast was awesome. A small hobby farm with alpacas, pigs, chickens, and sheep. The great breakfasts were sourced from the farm, for example, bacon and eggs. This location let us explore the Golden Bay area, as we weren't going to back over Takaka Hill until we were ready to leave. Scenic Grove was a short, fun walk through weird limestone rocks and had a beautiful scenic view. We saw our first fantail bird and tried to film the ubiquitous cicadas. This was our only foray into the great Abel Tasman Park. We stopped at the monument to Abel Tasman, which had a nice lookout. We chickened out on seeing Totoranui Beach, as the road was gravel, very narrow and winding for many kilometers. We stopped at Tata Beach, which was quite large and largely empty, with beautiful yellow sands. There were many shorter seaside stops that we visited on the way back to Takaka town and supper. Labyrinth Rocks was another free, quirky rock park. Many of the spots had imaginative names. See if you can spot the Camel's Head or the Look Up to See the Stegosaurus. As we visited the sacred Te Waikoropupu Springs, the first thing that greeted us was a weka bird, still somewhat rare. Don't pick at my tire. There's a lot of information to read before entering, including the Maori legend of a guardian taniwha, kind of a spirit dinosaur, and there was a large piece of punamu, or greenstone. The water is crystal clear, one of the clearest and purest in the world, and by volume, the largest spring in the southern hemisphere. This is the sacred springs. You can hopefully see the water bubbling up there, and more over there, a little bit over here. Beautiful, clear water. The place is Wahitapu, a sacred place, so you are not allowed any contact with the water. The culmination of our trip to the Golden Bay area was the visit to Wharariki Beach. This time we did brave the gravel roads, parked, and then walked a mile or more over essentially a goat path. When we arrived, there were so many dunes, I thought I was on Arrakis. It was definitely our favorite beach in New Zealand. We saw New Zealand fur seals up close, birds, and very few people. It was not a good beach for swimming, as the currents can be dangerous, but we did see at least one person with surfing gear. The drive to Kaikoura from Takaka Hill was a long 4 hours. The twisty-turny hill didn't seem quite as bad going back over it. The view from the hotel was amazing, with the light ever changing on the distant mountains. At times they looked unreal, almost like a watercolor painting. Whale watching was one of the highlights of the South Island. The day started a bit misty, but cleared as we went further from shore. We had to go out quite a bit to see them, but we managed to see 2 different sperm whales. This was a first for us, having seen humpback and fin whales in the wild previously. They certainly weren't as playful as humpbacks, but we were thrilled to see them.
Get your camera ready. He's going to take one last breath and he's out of here. Oh. Yeah.
As recommended by Daniel and Leah, we did the 3+ hour walk around the Kaikoura Peninsula. We saw seals, stunning cliff views, and towering forests. Lots of steps, but well worth it. The gondola ride was a must-see in Christchurch. We took it up and then walked down on foot.
I'm glad we're getting a gondola.
I'm recording.
At the top there was a museum which highlighted Christchurch history, including a full-size model of an extinct bird, the moa. The life of the earliest European settlers was also shown. We walked around the top of the trail for several hours, out to Castle Rock and then down the steep bridle path trail. a bit hard on the knees. The Peel Forest Reserve was a stop on the way to Lake Tepako, which Laurel found in one of the guidebooks. It had a very colorful washroom and a short, easy trail through massive trees with lots of interesting information. The road from Christchurch to Lake Tepako was long, but very scenic as the mountains grew close. I was excited about the Lake Tepako region as it was an international dark sky area. This means that all external lights are carefully monitored not to cause excessive light pollution. Unfortunately, my dreams of starry vistas were not to come true as clouds covered the skies for all but one night. We were able to see the Southern Cross, but that was about it. The lake and village were very beautiful, and there was the most photographed church of New Zealand there. We did a virtual sky show in the observatory, which was excellent. Mount Cook, or Aoraki, as the Maori call it, is the highest peak in New Zealand. We'd postponed the Hooker Valley Tract hike for 2 days as the weather was not good and the trail is often closed during bad weather. The day we were leaving for Oamaru on the coast was looking okay. It was a bit of a drive, but the roads were good and only a few single-lane bridges on the way. The Hooker Valley Track was a 10-kilometer, 3-hour return hike, mostly flat compared to many of the other trails we went on. The scenery was stunning, the bridges swaying, and the trail fairly busy as we got there early, but many more people were heading out as we were heading back.
Bit swaying here, crossing over this river.
The peak of Akaroa, Mount Cook, was shrouded in clouds, but they cleared briefly for a picture. This hike was definitely a highlight of the whole trip. The clay cliffs were another gem that Laurel found in one of the guidebooks. We stopped on the way to Oamaru. It was a short climb to these Badland-type formations. Oamaru was an unusual town, a last-minute addition to our trip after deciding not to go to Stewart Island. It had a Victorian precinct with distinct yellow sandstone buildings, lots of artsy shops, and the Steampunk HQ. This was a really weird place with crazy sculptures dedicated to the science fiction subgenre called steampunk. This is basically a parallel Earth where Victorian technology progressed on steam power rather than electricity or the eternal combustion engine. Look closely to see if you can spot my new motorcycle. We had read that the rare yellow-eyed penguins came into shore at a certain beach an hour or so before dusk. We waited for 3+ hours, but didn't see them. We did see some New Zealand fur seals and lots of other birds. The elephant rocks are these strange, large chunks of sandstone sticking out all over the place in this field. It was used in the filming of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. also stopped to see 2 different areas of Maori cliff paintings. Unfortunately, some of the better ones had been removed to be displayed in museums in the previous century. Being a rock guy, I wanted to visit the Moereki boulders on the way to Dunedin. These boulders consist of mud, fine silt, and clay, cemented by calcite. They are quite a sight to see. In Dunedin, we stayed in a place called a book-a-batch, a kind of a New Zealand equivalent of an Airbnb. Laurel suggested that we try to find one in Dunedin, as Jeff and Trish Cressman had stayed in many of them during their trip to New Zealand a few years back. The apartment was in a beautiful location on the Otago Peninsula, south of Dunedin proper. The view of the harbor was great, but though we loved our trusty Nissan, I was not willing to drive up the very steep driveway. The location was perfect, as two of our activities were further down the peninsula. The first activity was visiting the Royal Albatross Centre near the tip of the Otago Peninsula. This is the only place in the world where northern royal albatrosses nest on the mainland instead of a small island. These majestic birds have a 3-meter wingspan. The center also offers a tour of Fort Taiaroa, which was manned to fend off a feared invasion from Tsarist Russia in the 1880s and later against a possible Japanese attack in the Second World War. It featured the only fully restored 1889 Armstrong disappearing gun in the world in its original position. This gun would raise up to fire and then disappear from the recoil back underground. We also saw some shorebirds, including spoonbills. Later the same day, we came at dusk to see the blue penguins come in from sea. Although a bit wet and cold, it was amazing to see them cautiously coming to the shore and then go on to their nests. Blue penguins are among the smallest of the penguins. The area is pest-free, no possums, weasels, or stoats that might harm them. Daniel and Leah had recommended the climb to the organ pipes, strange volcanic rock formations, though they warned us that we might not be able to make the climb. Challenge accepted. It was a fairly straightforward climb, although steep in places. The organ pipes are basaltic hexagonal columns up to 1 meter in diameter. We climbed to the entrance of the columns, but to climb up further appeared a little dangerous, so we didn't. We continued on up the peak of Mount Cargill with spectacular views. The road from Dunedin to Teanu climbed from the coast into the midst of the southern Alps. On the way, we saw some funky mushrooms at a lunch stop. Lake Teanu and the village were very beautiful, but unfortunately the weather was iffy again. There was a bird sanctuary in the town. It contained several species of endangered birds, including the blue duck and the star of the show, the tahahi. This species was thought to have been extinct until a few were found in the fjordlands, and with careful work are now in recovery. We took a quick day trip to Lake Manapuri, rumored to be a very pretty lake. It really was, but the pictures unfortunately don't quite do it justice. On our last night in Te Anau, we took the Glowworm Cave tour. We had planned to visit a similar cave on the North Island, but the weather didn't agree. We took a boat across in the rain and took the tour. Since photos weren't allowed, these are from the Real NZ website, and the video is from National Geographic.
Hold on. And when that happens, when they let go and they start falling, because all of the beech trees are intertwined with each other and they're holding on, it causes that.
Getting to Milford Sound was half the fun. I did not want to drive the 2+ hours, so we had a bus pick us up in Te Anau. The driver was very knowledgeable and amusing. The area is called Fjordland for a good reason. There were lots of cascades, bare areas where there had been landslides, and rushing rivers.
Big U-shaped glacial valley.
We made an interesting stop at the Lake Gun Nature Walk with weird twisted trees and a beautiful lake. Near the end was this 1+ kilometer single-way tunnel controlled by traffic lights. It seemed barely roughed out, and I was glad to get out of it. Another stop on the way were the Mirror Lakes, so called because if the day is calm, the mountains are mirrored in the lakes, which were more the size of ponds, but mirror ponds just doesn't sound as good. We saw a New Zealand robin there as well.
I think they do have a couple of Cessnas on the fleet.
Milford Sound and the overnight cruise was definitely a highlight of the trip. We saw another weta bird on the dock, a somewhat rare bird. The ship was small compared to the usual cruise ships, but well appointed. One of the options was a trip in a smaller boat that toured around the bay. Because it had rained that day and the days before, there were cascades everywhere. Now, waterfalls refers to falling water. Cascades are what they're called when they tumble down the sides of the cliff. We saw several New Zealand fur seals. One even wanted to join us on the boat. The fjord and the mountains were stunning. We spent a quiet night in Queenstown near the airport and flew the next day for Auckland, saying goodbye to our trusty Nissan and to driving on the left side of the road, hopefully for good. Queenstown is surrounded by mountains, so flying out was a little bit exciting as we cleared the tops of the cliffs. During the flight, we flew close to Mount Taranaki, used as the Lonely Mountain in the Hobbit movies. I wish we had seen it from the ground. After taking the ferry across to Picton, we drove long 4 hours of very winding roads to Takaka over the hill and at our bed and breakfast. Over the next 3 days, we just loved exploring the Golden Bay area. Then another very long drive down the coast to Kaikoura, where we had a beautiful hotel and did some good hikes, and we went out and saw some sperm whales, which was amazing. Next, we drove down to Christchurch, not that far, and we went up the gondola, walked down. That was a good day as well. And then another long drive up to Lake Tepako, where we stayed for 3 days. Kind of rainy, cleared up on the last day, so we went up to Mount Cook, did the Hooker Valley Trail, and then drove down the same day to Oamaru, which was on the coast. Stayed there for 2 days, and then to Dunedin, where we saw penguins and had some good hikes. Then another long drive to Anau, where we saw the glowworms, and then we took the 1 day overnight cruise ship to Milford Sound, which was just amazing, as you've seen from the pictures. And then we drove, our bus drove us back to Anau, and then we drove to Queenstown, where we had a quiet evening, and then we got on Air New Zealand plane and flew back to Auckland. Since we missed the Weta workshop in Wellington, we really wanted to see it in Auckland. This company does the special effects behind the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit movies and many more. The whole tour was played up to be a little over the top, but it was a lot of fun. There were 3 sections with fake movies: horror, fantasy, and science fiction. There were interactive activities. I made a thing. We also wanted to go up the Sky Tower. The view was amazing, and we spotted a few areas that we had previously visited, such as Mount Eden, One Tree Hill, and Mount Rangitoto. There was a virtual reality ride that had you believing that you were in a giant slide going down the side of the tower. The aquarium had been closed because of the cyclone during our initial time in Auckland, so we were glad to be able to see it before we left. They had king and gentoo penguins as well as various sea life. Our final stop was further out the bus route from the aquarium to eat at Mission Bay. It had a nice beach, but the weather was iffy.